Thank you. Afternoon, everyone. Let's try this button. There we go. So yeah, I'm George Beard. I'm Head of New Mobility at TRL. For those of you who don't know who TRL is, a quick introduction. It stands for the Transport Research Laboratory. We've got quite a long legacy, originally formed in the 30s as part of, I think it was called the Ministry of Transport at the time. But since '96, we've been fully independent, and now we operate as a social enterprise owned by the Transport Research Foundation and no other shareholders. So we stay impartial and independent from government and industry, and deliver a range of research and consultancy services across the transport sector, predominantly on surface transport. So I'm going to talk to you about micromobility and inclusivity. So the first thing to recognise, of course, in a conversation on inclusivity is that people are diverse. It's particularly important that we cater for the needs of those with particular requirements. So people with mobility, hearing, visual, cognitive impairments, learning difficulties, mental health challenges, and so on. But actually, if we do that well, and we have good inclusive design, then it creates good environments and services and products for everyone, whether that's people with prams or carrying children or using walking sticks, or those with temporary health conditions which affect their mobility, and so on. So the message is, if we get this right, then benefits for all. In the context of micromobility, and apologies, I don't know why some of the images are not showing there. Let's try again. Oh, they come through there. There we go. Let's put them all up. So in the context of micromobility, there's also lots of diversity in terms of vehicles, which we need to think about. This is a selection, not exhaustive, but really shows the range of technologies that are emerging in various states of maturity. So we have e-bikes and e-cargo bikes, which fall in various categories of regulation depending on their power and speed. Got hand cycles and recumbent cycles, other adapted cycles. Standing and seated e-scooters, of course, a hot topic right now in itself, hugely varied in terms of their design and construction. And then a range of other more niche things which may stay niche or may not, may evolve into other things that form part of our transport system, like self-balancing hoverboards and unicycles and electric skateboards and so on. And so really, if we're going to be inclusive, we need to think about what the future holds in terms of these range of modes and other things which haven't quite emerged yet, thinking about what that future mix should and may look like. How do we do this? What are the levers we can pull? Well, I think the SAFE system, though not typically used in the context of inclusivity, it is a useful framework here. So this sets out a range of areas that should be addressed to improve safety outcomes for all. And actually, I think it's useful to consider these areas when talking about inclusivity as well. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to focus on the infrastructure part, safe roads, safe infrastructure. Fits with this conference, but also there's not enough time to cover all of it. Now, TRL is not in the business of designing or building infrastructure, but what we do get involved with is assessment, trialling, and evaluation of new designs, things that are novel. And I'll talk you through a couple of examples here. So the first one is a programme of research we did for Transport for London, looking at a range of innovative cycling infrastructure, and most of that was based on the Dutch approach. So it included things like different forms of segregated cycle lanes, low-level cycle signals, the Dutch-style roundabout, and the bus stop bypass, which is what I'll focus on here. So as you can see in that image, bus stop bypass is basically where you have a cycle lane which wraps around the near side of a bus stop. That creates a bus stop island. And then you have some form of crossing to allow pedestrians who want to embark or disembark the bus to access that island. And so the idea is that it benefits cyclists by reducing their need to sort of navigate around a stopped bus. They can just carry on their path. And so we ran a series of off-street trials of this, building a mock version of it on an off-street location, and part of those trials looked at the impacts and attitudes of a range of people with disabilities. So we had wheelchair users, we had people with other sorts of mobility impairments come in and use the facility, blind and visually impaired people, and also a group of elderly people who used walking sticks and things like this. And so we let them experience this facility firsthand, kind of simulated normal amounts of pedestrian and vehicle movements and the bus arriving and stopping and so on to create some realism. And we explored what worked and what didn't. And so some common themes emerged. So there was a general uneasiness about the design, but that was mainly linked to the lack of familiarity. So that really highlights the importance of good information, education campaigns to raise awareness of these new designs so that people know how to use and operate them. We also tested a number of different kind of variations as shown on this slide, so where the crossing either had a zebra marking or not, and where there was a ramp or not between the kind of cycle lane and the pedestrian crossing. And we found that there was a general preference for the zebra markings that helped with recognition of where to cross, with perceptions of safety when doing so, when using the facility, and also with comprehension of who has right of way. And those findings were particularly salient for people with mobility impairments. Another example then, again involving zebra crossings. So this looked at side road zebras, which are exactly what they sound like. They're a stripped back version of the standard zebra crossing design, and that simplification basically removes the Belisha beacons and the zigzag markings and the requirement for a setback distance. That allows you to place the zebra crossing directly at the mouth of side roads, as shown in the image. And so we ran, again, kind of quite an extensive program of research here to test and validate this approach. That included some real-world trials with people with various disabilities, as shown there. And again, found some common themes here about what works and what doesn't. So again, information and communication came up. Actually, any changes to the kind of typical approach for designing these environments can have a really big impact on people with disabilities. Particularly the blind and visually impaired group were quite vocal about this, and so really important to get that right at the start. All the groups did like the benefits that this design brought in terms of allowing them to maintain their desired walking line from one curb across the side road to the other side of the footway. However, again, those with visual impairments raised specific concerns that because the side road zebra was closer to the main road, there may be a risk of them deviating into that main road traffic. And so here, again, that raises the importance of having correct installation of tactile paving. There were common themes across all types of road users around concerns with drivers failing to stop if they weren't expecting that side road zebra to be right at the mouth of the junction, as it's atypical. But this was particularly salient for the people with hearing impairments, because they are less able to hear oncoming traffic from behind them if they're approaching a crossing. So again, that has implications for information and education campaigns, but also site selection. So if there are particular sites which are maybe high volume, high speed, very noisy traffic environments, then they may not be suitable for these designs for those reasons. Some plus points, that again, the zebra was popular. It seems a common theme in many projects, that it's recognizable, it's familiar, people know that it's there for them to cross and how the rights of way operate. And this was raised as a particular benefit for people with cognitive impairments and learning difficulties, reducing risk of confusion and distraction and so on. So moving back to the issue around diversity in vehicles, there's some useful guidance from NACTO recently published in the USA, which sets out a set of core areas and principles within each of those areas for how to design our built environment to suit this growing complexity of different types of vehicles. It's called Designing for Small Things with Wheels, which I think is a great title and perfectly explains the challenges. So part of this is about lane widths, and that is to do with deciding the widest vehicle that you want to accommodate in a space, so whether that's a normal e-bike or up to the larger e-cargo bikes that we're seeing now with trailers and so on, but making a conscious decision about what user types you want to cater for, and then building in appropriate bikeable widths, as it's called, which accommodates sort of both the riding space but also space for other users to pass them within the facility. There's a focus on surfaces and gradients, so this has a recommendation for smooth but not slick surfaces, and that's particularly important for small wheeled things like e-scooters. Debris and gravel and things can be particularly hazardous for those types of vehicles. And then linked with that, proper maintenance of those facilities. No good if the bike lanes sort of fill up with leaves and so on. And also a recommendation to be sensitive to gradient changes so that there's no sort of large deviations which may become a challenge for some of the bigger, heavier vehicles. Intersections also important, of course. Here it's about waiting spaces, being safe for this mix of users and vehicle types. It's about ensuring there's space for turning, where some vehicles might have different turning radii, about changing lanes and so on, and also making all of those users really visible to the motor traffic if there's interactions there. And then lastly, network legibility. So that's really important across the board. With the growing mix of users and vehicle types, it's really important that everyone knows where they should be and how they should behave. So at TRL, we've been taking into consideration guidance such as NACTO's and other best practice out there, and our own research over many decades, to develop a set of active travel audits, as we call them. So this is a standard assessment of quality of infrastructure, and it takes the perspective of two key user groups, so the pedestrians and then cyclists and micro-mobility riders. And the aim here is to provide that standardized assessment of a route, an area, a link, a feature, whatever is in question, and then provide practical recommendations for how to improve the quality of that. And so it's based on quite a comprehensive system that we've been using for a while. For pedestrians, it's called the Pedestrian Environment Review System, or PERS. There's 55 points here that we look at across these areas, so links, crossings, routes, public transport waiting areas, interchanges, public spaces, and so on. And within those, there's a whole list of factors that are taken into consideration. And for cyclists and micro-mobility riders, it's quite similar. Some differences here in that there's a focus on cycle parking as well, interchanges, some of the factors are different. But we've developed these systems so that we can consider that diversity in both vehicle types and user types. So to wrap up then, what are the key messages? Well, probably three things. There's a growing diversity in users and vehicles, and so if we want an inclusive transport system, we need to factor that in. The best way of doing that is designing it right from the start, and as part of that design process, really, it's about engaging with the end users directly. So they are the experts, the people who have mobility impairments and so on. We need to be talking to them to understand how things work and whether they don't, and what better solutions are available. Of course, you can't always design it right from the start, and we've got some legacy infrastructure to improve, so there's going to be some retrofitting in the process of assessing that and coming up with new approaches. Then we should be considering the perspective of all users. That's the end of my talk. Thank you very much for listening.